Sorry, it's my mistake. I was not sure if this battery of the laptop would last both sessions, the singing session and the preaching session. This is why we limited it to only one song. Next time I should remember to bring the charger along with me, so that we are going to do all the service in PowerPoint. I think it makes a difference because anybody we don't need a song. As long as we have electricity, then we should be able to do it quickly or easily. Our reading was taken from the book of Genesis. We will go back to that reading in a few moments to come. But let me begin by saying we are faced with situations where we have to make a choice. In fact, that's exactly what it is to be a natural human being. Every time you have to be making a choice and decide, what am I going to do? You are usually choosing from different things, and you are going to come up with a choice which you suppose will be the best choice. When you wake up every morning, you have to make a choice. What am I going to eat today? Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? All those things are some of the things that are part of life, because we have to be making a choice. We read about a character in the book of Genesis. We read about him first time in the book of Genesis chapter 12, when we are told about this man who is called Lot, who was a relative to Abraham. In fact, he was a nephew to Abraham, because Lot's father was Abraham's brother. We also read about Lot in chapter 13. We read about him in chapter 14. We also read about him in chapter 19 especially. And of course, even in the New Testament, in the book of 2 Peter, we read about this man that is called Lot. So I want us to have a look at this man that is called Lot and the choice that he actually made in his life, which of course had a very great impact in his life. And at the end of the day, I want you and me to be able to see what are some of the choices that we also make in our lives, which also can have a great impact in our lives. So those are the things that we actually are going to be looking at this morning. So the title of my lesson this morning is called Making Choices. So let's go back quickly to the reading and read some of the verses that were read by the attender this morning from Genesis chapter 13. Genesis chapter 13, if we read from verse 1, it tells us about Abraham that has been asked by God to leave his native country, and he is supposed to go to where he did not know, but God's promise was that I am going to give you the land to live in. Abraham is going to come all the way from Ur of the Chaldeans. He came briefly, they lodged at Haran, then he came down via Canaan. Finally, he found himself in Egypt. But he's going to lie to the Egyptian king about his wife. Then, of course, the Egyptian king, when he discovered that Sarah was actually not his sister but his wife, we know for sure that she was his sister. But what was important, the relationship was that he was his wife. He lied and said she was his sister. When the king of Egypt discovered that he had lied, he was chucked out of Egypt. So chapter 12 ends by telling us about them being chased out of Egypt. All this time, he was traveling with Lot and several other people. Now, when we move into chapter 13, they've just been saved out of Egypt. They came back up to Canaan. And of course, the verse says, so Abraham went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him into the Negev. The Negev was part of Canaan, which was almost down when you go further than Beersheba. You would actually come to this place that was called the Negev, or other versions would actually call it the Negev, which is a V instead of a B at the end. Now, Abraham was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold, and he journeyed on from the Negev and as far as to Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abraham called upon the name of the Lord. And Lot, who went with Abraham, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together. For their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the headsmen of Abraham's livestock and the headsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. Then Abraham said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your headsmen and my headsmen, for we are kinsmen. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." And Lot lifted up his eyes. This is key in the lesson that we are reading from verse 10. And Lot lifted up his eyes, and he saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abraham settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley, and he moved his tents as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked. They were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. If you think about it, what we are being told here is the story of Abraham and Lot. And of course, there are headsmen that are now fighting over the grazing area. But Abraham, being a noble man, he is going to engage Lot and say, "We cannot fight ourselves because we are related. So the solution is easy. Let us separate. Go your way, I will go my way. If you go this way, I will go this way. If you go this way, I will go that way. I'm not going to go where you go. But you are going to choose first." So verse 10 tells us that Lot looked into the Jordan Valley, and as he was looking there, he actually saw that this place was well watered, meaning to say it was fertile, it was green, it was plush, it was everything. And this is always a problem with us, of course. We are those people. Our eyes are easy to see things that are attractive. And of course, we will actually fall for that. Forgetting, of course, at times that not all that glitters is not gold. So Lot is going to see all this green, and of course he fell in love with it, and he said, "This is where I'm going to go." Fair and fine, he is going to go there. But there is something that is interesting in the verse that we were reading now. Listen to what verse 18 says. So Noah is actually going to go, and he's going to extend his tents as far as Sodom. But listen to verse 18. Now the men of Sodom were wicked. They were great sinners against the Lord. But nevertheless, Noah still is going to make a decision. He's going to make a choice. And he says, "This is where I am going to go and live." Despite the fact that these people were wicked, Lot himself was not really that wicked, but he said, "I am going to live there." And of course, there's no way you are going to live among the wicked people, and you still think that you are going to remain unscathed. Lot is going to go down there, and this is where he is going to live. So let's see. And let's look at the choice that Lot is going to make. Of course, this is exactly what we are talking about in the book of Genesis. Lot is going to be introduced to us. He is introduced to us, of course, as the nephew of Abraham, who, of course, sojourned with him, as we read in Genesis chapter 12, verse 5, and also in chapter 13, reading from verse 1. He was a man who, like his uncle, became quite wealthy. Of course, that's what we just read from Genesis chapter 13, verse 2 to 5. He was so rich. And of course, because of the combined wealth of Abraham and Lot, we've already looked at that. They were forced to separate, as we read in Genesis chapter 13 there. Given the opportunity to choose first, of course, Lot is going to make a choice, which on the surface was very good. I mean, if you are looking at that green pastures and you choose that, isn't that a good choice you are actually making? So on the surface, the choice was actually very good. But of course, we know that good as it seemed, it actually resulted in sorrow and of course in hardship for Lot as life went on. So those are some of the things that we are actually going to discover. What exactly was the sorrow coming from? What exactly was the hardship that Lot is going to encounter in his life? As a result, of course, of his choice, Lot suffered many problems. In fact, from the moment that he went down there, he is going to suffer problems perhaps until the time that he is going to die. Some of the problems that he's going to encounter, according to Genesis chapter 14, he encountered a war. There was a king who was called Chadlawoma. He is going to make a treaty with 4 more kings. And of course, they are going to go and attack kings of Sodom, where Lot was actually a resident. And of course, they are going to capture them and they are going to go with them. Lot is not going to remain. He also is going to be taken along. So, other than suffering war, he also is going to encounter a problem of being kidnapped. Because he was kidnapped and they took him away. But also, he is going to suffer oppression and torment by the citizens of Sodom. If you read 2 Peter chapter 2, way, many years after Lot had lived, the Apostle Peter, when he wrote this verse, he's going to make an acknowledgement about this character that was called Lot, which once existed. But one thing that he says about Lot is that this man was a righteous man. However, his soul was always tormented because he was living amongst the wicked people. You know, whenever I read that verse, there is something that I actually think about. In fact, one of the things that come into my mind is the fact that when Paul went into, as Paul was preaching during his second preaching trip, Paul is going to find himself in a place that was called Athens, which was, of course, the capital city of the country of Greece, which was in the region of Achaia at the time. So when Paul went in there, every street that he was walking on, he saw idols that were being worshipped there. The verse says Paul's soul was actually tormented. What was tormenting Paul's soul was the fact that he is a righteous person who is walking among wicked people. People that are worshipping idols, which is a sin. And of course, there is also a motivation that I always get out of that statement. That's all. What that means then is, if I am a righteous person, one of these days, if I find myself having a one-on-one with a sin, my soul should be tormented. Because a sin should actually torment you if you are not sinful. If you are wicked, when you go into a wicked area, a wicked place, you should actually sense it, that where I am, I don't belong here. Lot sensed that, but because he had already made a choice, he is going to be stuck right there in Sodom and Gomorrah. So he's going to suffer oppression and torment by the citizens of Sodom, as we actually read in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 7 to 8, and of course in Genesis chapter 19 as well. But we also see that he is going to suffer some losses in his life. One of the losses that he suffered is that the loss of all his material wealth. In Genesis chapter 19, when God instructed him to leave, he is not going to take out anything. We have already been told that this was one of the wealthy people, perhaps as wealthy as what Abraham was. But he is not going to take out anything out of Sodom and Gomorrah. He lost everything when God said go, because there was no time to pay. He actually went. He also is going to suffer death of his wife. We know how his wife is going to die. He also suffered the shame of incest with his daughters. In fact, there is a crime even in our law which is called incest. It's not allowed. It's not permissible by law to have sexual relationship or to have sexual relations with the closest relative, your nieces, your this and that. Lot actually suffered that because we know that he's going to go to bed with his daughters. He suffered all these problems. But I want you to notice the fact that all these things happened to him despite the fact that Lot was a righteous person, as we have already seen from 2 Peter chapter 7 to 8. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 7 to 8. Lot suffered all these problems. What then does this tell me? And what then does this tell you? It should tell us that despite the fact that we might be righteous people, if we make wrong choices, we might still suffer the consequences, despite the fact that we are righteous. But if we are not able to make a right choice, we may actually suffer the consequences of making a wrong choice. The example of Lot should help us to make proper choices in our lives. And of course, Christians should consider some of the following things that I'm going to propose. And one of the things that I'm proposing to you is that some of the choices we make that greatly affect our lives. When we are about to make a choice, we must make considerations before we move into that choice. How much effect is this choice going to cause into my life? We also have to consider some suggestions on how to make the right decisions. Before we make a decision, have we considered some suggestions? Maybe the decision that I'm making is not the right one. Why can't I make this one? So we have to consider all that. We also have to consider what to do when we realize that we have made a wrong decision. What then am I going to do? I'm finding myself stuck in this situation, but what am I going to do? That's a very important question. Lot did not ask himself that question. He found himself stuck in Sodom, where wickedness was the order of the day. But he did not ask himself a question, what then should I do? Because perhaps if he had asked himself that question, he would have walked out and perhaps looked for another place. What are some of our most common choices that we actually make in life? What choices do we make that greatly affect, of course, our lives? One of the most important choices that we always make in our lives is one which is up the board there, choosing to follow Jesus. In fact, this is one that will affect your life more than any other choice. Importantly, it will determine your place in eternity. When we were singing one of the songs which actually is talking about in the land of faithless day lies a city, four square. And we actually say when we go there, we are going to be living with the Lord, where there is no torment, where there is no problem, where there is no sin. But all that is determined by our choice which we make while we are still living on earth, choosing to follow Jesus. Because if we choose to follow Jesus, this choice is actually going to alter some of our choices, as we are going to see as we actually move on. We are going to make this choice because, importantly, as I alluded to already, it will determine your place and my place, of course, in eternity. Which eternity am I going to go to? Am I going to go to eternal life, or am I going to go to eternal destruction? All that happens while I am still here in flesh, because after that, then I'm not able to make a choice. That's one of the choices that we actually need to make while we are still living. It will also have a bearing on every other choice you make. For as a follower of Christ, you will actually be concerned with doing Christ's will, not your own will. So there's a lot of alteration that is going to happen in your life when you have chosen to become a Christian. There are some businesses that you were doing when you were not a Christian, which you can't do anymore because you are now a Christian. It sounds not right. When we actually talk about there are some jobs that you can't take up when you have become a Christian, because those jobs really are not going to promote your Christian life. So there are so many things that we are going to lose in life. Paul talks about that. In fact, we know that Paul, when he makes acknowledgement of his past, he says he was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. There are so many things that he actually acquired because of being an opposer of the Lord's church. But the moment he received Christ, he actually counted. He says, I count all that to be lost. That's now in the past. That's what he actually tells us in the book of Philippians. When he's writing that letter to the Philippians, he's reminding them about his past. But he actually is saying, when I turned to become a Christian, I forgot about my past. All that I now count as loss. In fact, I wasted my time. There are so many things that we actually are not able to do the moment we actually become Christians. So this is why I'm saying choosing to follow Jesus is a very important decision, which is going to make an alteration on many of other decisions in our lives. But another choice that we need to make is choosing your career. The choice you make can have a lasting effect upon your marriage or your family or even your service to God. It's said to me, I work with several groups, particularly the rural groups. I do travel quite a lot to several places. This year in particular has not been a very good year with some of the brethren in the rural area. Last year and this year actually, especially the younger girls in the church. If I can count, I think I can actually come up with perhaps not less than 10 young girls that actually got married between last year and this year, out of the rural congregations that we work with. But what makes me sad is the fact that out of all the 10, none of them was married by a Christian. And what does that mean? It has impacted negatively in their Christian life. Many of them are no longer coming to the Lord's church because they have married outside. Because in our patriarchal society where the husband dictates the pace, you are bound to go to a church where your husband is going. This is something that we have grown up to know all our lives. When our mothers were married, They would always automatically go to where the father was going. That's exactly what it is. We cannot run away from that. So, what I'm saying is, your life can actually be affected by your marriage. I mean, you choosing and worshiping Christ can actually be affected by choosing your career. As I'm saying, the choice you make can have a lasting effect upon your marriage. We have seen and we have known several families that actually disintegrated because so many, either the wife decided to go to the UK. Of course, that's the most common destination that we are told about. The wife is going to the UK, or the husband is going to the UK. 7 years not coming back. What is happening with the partner that remains here? We have seen so many families that have disintegrated because of a career. I want to pursue my career. But as you are pursuing your career to the logical end, there are other things that are suffering in your life. Your marriage can actually suffer. Your family can actually suffer. Your service to God can actually suffer because of your career. This, of course, we know. There are several of us, perhaps some who were even upcoming right here, who actually chose careers that took them away. Because they were taken away from home, wherever they are no longer going to church. They are no longer worshiping God, so to speak, because of the choice of the career. So, a career can also affect your life. The third most common choice that we always make in our life is choosing your mate. I've already talked about that with the in mind the younger girls that have gotten married to wrong people, if you ask me. Because if you are going to marry somebody that's going to take you away from God, that's not a right partner, that's not a right husband, that's not a right wife. A right wife should actually encourage you to worship God. The decision made will, to a greater extent, determine your degree of happiness in this life. Choosing your mate is actually going to determine your happiness. We know some people who are in marriage, yet they are actually not in marriage because they are not happy in marriage. I remember one man who once said, and he said, I'm actually in jail. He was saying, I'm actually wearing, when you go to jail, you actually put on that prison gown. So his song was, Niapika Mina, Nikogezan. What is he talking about? I am actually just like somebody who is in prison. Even though I wake up in the morning and I put on my casual clothes, unlike those that I had come in prison. But I am in prison because of the wife that I am living with, because of the husband that I am living with. Choosing the mate is also very important. And we may make a wrong choice in this regard. If you make a wrong choice, of course the life is going to be very miserable. In fact, choosing a mate, it will have a permanent bearing on your children and of course their emotional well-being. Of course there is always a thinking and a belief that, well, if I find that this marriage is not compatible with what I want, I can always move out. Yes, you may think you can simply divorce a person who turns out to be a bad choice, but there is always a consequence by doing that. Once you have children, there is no way to reverse the choice you made as to who is the mother or the father of your children. As the mother, you may decide to walk out of this man, but what's going to happen with the children? They are the children to this man, so you cannot change that. It's interesting that you can actually have an ex-husband, ex-wife, but you cannot have an ex-mother, or this is my ex-father. That doesn't exist. Once somebody becomes someone's mother, that's their mother for life. So if that was a wrong choice that you made, so it means you actually have made somebody to be a wrong mother for your children. That actually is going to have an emotional bearing in their lives. Another choice that we, of course, you have to make every day is, of course, to choose your friends. How do you choose your friends? Having close friends can actually be a wonderful blessing, at least according to Proverbs chapter 17. It's a blessing to have good friends. But it can actually be a curse, of course, if you choose wrong friends, because they can actually take you away from the Lord, and of course, they may cause you to do some other things that you should not actually do. In fact, we remember in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, in verse 33, Paul actually says, bad friends corrupt good character. What is he talking about? That you would have chosen a wrong friend. If you choose a wrong friend, they are actually going to corrupt your good morals, if you actually have good morals. The other choice that we actually have to make in life is choosing where you will live. It was in this choice, of course, where Lot got it all wrong. It was in this choice that Lot made his life-altering mistake. It might just be there are some modern-day Sodoms and Gomorrahs today. Where I choose to live, is it going to promote my life? Where I want to go and choose to live, is it going to allow me, to continue worshiping God if I'm already worshiping God? Lot actually made a mistake and he faltered actually on this choice. So because of that, I'm going to suggest some things. How can we more likely make the right choice? Having known what Lot did, how about ourselves? Because the concern is about you, the concern is about me. How can we more likely make the right choice? These are some of the suggestions that I actually have for you. If we want to make a right choice, one of the things that we need to do is to ask God for wisdom. In fact, that's exactly what James chapter 1, verse 5 to 8 actually talks about. We need to ask God for wisdom in everything that we do. We need to pray to God so that whatever we are doing, God is going to be guiding us in doing that. We don't need to use our wisdom because we actually don't have any wisdom. In fact, it's interesting that just this morning we were looking at one king. We were reading in 2 Kings chapter 1. You remember the king that was called Ahaziah. Instead of going and consult God, he actually decided to consult himself. And he even used his wisdom to go and consult a god from Ekron, from a Gentile. Instead of going, he was asked the question, is there no God in Israel that we have decided to go and consult outside? We need to always go and consult God himself for wisdom. But we also need to seek advice from others. There are people that are around us, some who are very good people. Whenever we want to make a decision or a choice, let's also consult them. These people could be your family, these people could be your friends, these people could be your neighbors. There are some people that have walked the same road that you want to walk. Ask them for advice. Some of them will actually, without wanting any payment, they'll give you that advice for free because they want to see you doing good. But one of the things that we also can do, when we want to make a decision, is of course to discuss your alternatives with older, especially older and mature Christians. They have seen it all and they are never going to mislead you. They can't lead you astray. They are going to tell you the right things that you need to do. The other thing that you also need to do is perhaps to consult the wisdom that is found in the Bible, especially the books like the book of Proverbs. It actually carries some practical, aspects of life. If you read that book, it may actually teach us something. Of course, we have to admit that some of those things that are said in the book of Proverbs, for example, Proverbs chapter 22 talks about, training your child in the way they should go. When they grow up, they are never going to abandon it. That's not always practical. Some of the children can still be trained and still can live the way they have been taught. But it's a very practical book which can actually give us guidance. Whatever you do it for the Lord's sake. Of course, those are some of the passages that I've actually quoted there. What do we do when we realize, or what should we do when we realize that our choice was wrong? Do what Lot did. When he realized that his choice was wrong, when God visited him and God told him to flee, he heeded the call of God, he heeded the word of God, and he fled Sodom and Gomorrah. But we also we are supposed to do what is right without reservation. And in that regard, let's think about Lot's wife. Jesus actually said in Luke chapter 17, remember Lot's wife. And I'm also saying we should remember Lot's wife in this regard. When we want to do the right thing, we should never have any reservation in it. Let's do it all out. Lot's wife decided to go, but the other half of the heart was decided to remain. And we know the consequences that actually had to fall. We also need to do what Peter did when he denied Christ. He showed remorse. He repented. We need to repent if there is sin that is involved in our choice. And of course, we need to repent to God and make our situation right with God. We also need to resolve to serve the Lord. We also need to do what Paul did after persecuting the church. We also can accept forgiveness which Jesus offers. We also need to determine to live for the Lord the rest of our lives to the best of our ability. We also need to, of course, the worst thing to do is to continue in the choice because of pride or some other reason. Once we have discovered that the choice we have made is a wrong choice, we need to come out of that choice, not continue in it simply because of pride. Many men of us, of course, the book of the Proverbs talks about the pride, and it says the pride comes just before fall. If you see someone who is becoming so proud, they are just about to fall. Because God hates the proud. He doesn't want people to be proud. Pride is the worst enemy of human beings. There are certain things that we don't want to do simply because what are people going to say? So I'm going to continue doing this simply because of pride. We should actually walk out of pride because the Bible condemns those that are proud. What is my conclusion? The example of Lot, as I've written up the board there, it should teach us that making the proper decision is very important. Making the proper choice in the beginning is very important. The example of Lot should also warn us not to make our choices light. When Lot was making a choice, he did not look at all the negatives that could come up with this choice. He only was blinded by the wealthiness of the grazing area that he wanted to go. So he actually looked at the positives only. He never ever thought about the negatives. So he took everything to be light. But we know how this actually is going to affect Lot throughout. We have talked about Lot being entangled in the war. We have talked about Lot being kidnapped. We have talked about Lot who actually lost his wife. We have talked about the Lot, this Lot who actually is going to have incest with his children. We have talked about Lot who eventually is going to lose the wealth that he wanted to preserve. Simply because when he made the choice, there is the blind side which he did not look at, which you and me will do well to look for before we actually make a choice. But in my conclusion also, the example of Lot is going to teach us a lot of things. So next time, when you want to make a decision, whatever choice that you want to make, I urge you to remember Lot next time that you are faced with an important decision to make. If you remember Lot and some of the mistakes that came out of his choice, take yourself to be in Lot's shoes. Take yourself to be Lot, and also anticipate problems in the choice that you are going to make. What if this choice turns out to be wrong? What am I going to do? That is actually going to help us moving forward as we try to make the right choices. I hope and trust that this situation or this story of Lot is actually going to help us making the right choices as we actually move forward with our lives, especially now that we have chosen to become Christians. We are bound to make wrong choices in our lives. That's inevitable. A human being is a human being. We make mistakes in the way we do things. But the most important thing is, before we make that mistake, or even when we have made that mistake, and we have realized that we are in a mess, let's come out of the mess. Let's throw pride away, and let us resolve our situation so that we are going to make our situation right with God. Let us always remember that Lot, a righteous person, made a wrong choice. You, a righteous person, can also make a wrong choice. But you need to correct the choice once you have discovered that this choice is a wrong choice. I'm going to end there with this discussion, hoping that maybe there's one or two things that I've said this morning that may help us as we are always faced with a situation every day to make a choice. Be it the choice of marriage, be it the choice of career, be it the choice, whatever choice you are faced with, you need to be prudent as you are making those choices, because whatever choice you make today may have a bearing in your life and in the generations to come. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation this morning.